What if the reason this connection feels so powerful isn't because it's love, but because your unconscious recognizes an old wound wearing a familiar face? One of the most revealing signs that a connection is real and not a trauma echo is the way your body responds after intimacy. Real connection does not demand constant vigilance. It does not leave the nervous system buzzing or trembling. When you are close to someone authentic, there is a subtle but unmistakable sense of regulation that occurs. Your body can relax, even if your mind is still curious or analyzing. This is in direct contrast to trauma-based relationships, which activate patterns long before you are aware of them. Trauma echoes trigger a heightened state of alertness. The body feels compelled to anticipate abandonment, rejection, or betrayal. You may notice it in a racing heart, a tightening chest, or a subtle restlessness that lingers after every interaction. In real connection, these reactions are replaced by a groundedness that is often quiet, almost imperceptible, but profoundly stabilizing. The nervous system carries memory in ways the conscious mind cannot always articulate. It knows whether a person is safe long before words are exchanged, long before intentions are clarified. This is why trauma echoes feel so magnetic. They mirror old wounds and unprocessed fears, and the body responds with the same intensity as it did during the original trauma. It is the body that remembers the unresolved moments, the sudden separations, the subtle rejections that shaped early attachment patterns. With trauma-based connections, closeness is never neutral. Every touch, every word, every look carries echoes of the past, and your system registers them as danger. Anxiety persists not because of the other person's actions in the present, but because your body is anticipating the repetition of old, unresolved pain. A real connection, however, operates differently. After moments of intimacy, whether physical, emotional, or intellectual, you are not left suspended in fear or hypervigilance. There is a settling. The body returns to its natural rhythm. The mind feels lighter, even if there is complexity or disagreement. You are not replaying old scenarios unconsciously, trying to predict whether the bond will survive the next small shift in emotion. Instead, there is a spaciousness in which both people exist fully without the constant need for emotional scaffolding or defense. Calm is not the absence of excitement, it is the presence of safety. You can experience passion, intensity, or vulnerability and still feel fundamentally secure in the connection. It is also important to observe subtle cues over time. Real connection is not measured solely in moments of extreme comfort or pleasure, but in how your body and mind respond to ordinary interactions. A simple phone call, a shared meal, or quiet conversation should not leave you drained or anxious. You should notice, without effort, a consistency in the way the connection influences your internal state. Even when there is disagreement, tension, or challenge, the baseline is not fear. The nervous system learns that closeness with this person does not mean danger. You do not experience a cascade of adrenaline in anticipation of a potential emotional collapse. Your body may register surprise, disappointment, or even grief at times, but it is never trapped in anticipatory trauma. Over time, this calm becomes a mirror of authenticity. The psyche begins to recognize that safety exists not as a fantasy, but as a lived experience. The more you encounter this regulated, restorative presence, the more you are able to distinguish it from trauma echoes that masquerade as intimacy. It is a subtle but profound teacher, showing that connection can coexist with autonomy, that closeness does not require surrender, and that genuine attachment heals rather than re-traumatizes. Calm after closeness is not a reward. It is a signal. It tells you that your nervous system, which has navigated danger and uncertainty for years, recognizes the other person as fundamentally trustworthy. It is a silent confirmation that the bond you are experiencing is not repeating old wounds, but existing in the present moment, allowing for real attunement, mutual respect, and sustained emotional integration. One of the most subtle yet profound signs that a connection is real is the absence of performance. In trauma-based relationships, you often feel compelled to become someone you are not, to mold yourself into an acceptable version of who you think the other person wants. Every word, gesture, and expression can feel rehearsed or calculated. You find yourself filtering thoughts before speaking, smoothing reactions before they appear, carefully balancing intimacy with the fear of rejection. This is not connection. It is negotiation with your own psyche, attempting to maintain safety within the illusion of closeness. When you are with a real connection, this constant internal negotiation begins to fade. The psyche remembers patterns of adaptation long before the conscious mind notices. If you grew up in environments where approval was conditional, or where love was only given in response to performance, you carry that habit into adulthood. Trauma echoes are seductive precisely because they trigger this old program. You instinctively start performing to be lovable, to be safe, to avoid the recurrence of past pain. The performance may be subtle, hiding anger, amplifying enthusiasm, dampening needs, or overcompensating in ways that feel unnatural. It is exhausting, yet it can feel necessary, as if survival depends on it. The real test of connection is how quickly and how often you feel you can let these defenses drop. A genuine connection does not demand an edited self. It does not require you to suppress your contradictions, your vulnerabilities, or your impulses to maintain closeness. You may reveal aspects of yourself that are messy, unpolished, or uncertain, and still be met with acceptance rather than judgment. This does not mean the connection is without challenge or that discomfort never arises. Real bonds are dynamic and complex, but the difference lies in the absence of existential threat. You do not fear that showing your true thoughts or emotions will cause the other person to withdraw or reject you. There is an implicit understanding that both individuals are complete and autonomous, rather than fragments seeking validation through performance. Performance often creates intimacy that is illusory, not authentic. You may feel understood, appreciated, or even adored, but it is based on a version of yourself you cannot sustain indefinitely. The trauma bond thrives in this space. It rewards the mask, it punishes the authentic self, and it conditions you to repeat the cycle. In a real connection, the mirror is not of who you think you must be, it reflects who you actually are. There is no constant editing, no fear that a misstep will unravel everything. You can laugh freely, cry openly, disagree without manipulation, and reveal your insecurities without strategizing. Notice the energy you carry. When you are performing, even subtly, there is a tension in your body, a tightness that never fully relaxes. Every movement has an undercurrent of calculation. When the performance fades in the presence of another person and you can simply exist, the body feels relief. Breathing deepens, muscles soften, and the mind begins to trust that your presence alone is enough. Real connection does not ask you to be different. It asks only that you show up as you are, without pretense or strategy. Performance also shapes time. In trauma echoes, you expend enormous energy managing appearances, maintaining the facade of harmony, or preemptively protecting yourself from imagined slights. In a real connection, energy flows naturally. You are not measuring every word, anticipating every reaction, or editing your thoughts before expression. Communication becomes effortless, not because it is perfect, but because it is genuine. Interaction is based on authenticity, and over time, this authenticity itself becomes a grounding force. In essence, the absence of performance is both liberating and clarifying. It signals that the connection is not built on manipulation, fear, or repetition of old wounds. Instead, it is built on mutual recognition, where both people are seen and accepted as whole beings. The true measure is not in words or promises, but in the subtle relaxation that occurs when your defenses drop. In these moments, your psyche recognizes safety, not because the other person guarantees it, but because their presence allows you to reclaim yourself piece by piece, layer by layer. One of the most revealing signs that a connection is real and not a trauma echo is the ability of the relationship to survive the collapse of fantasy. Trauma-based connections thrive on projection. You do not fall in love with the person in front of you. You fall in love with a reflection of unresolved parts of yourself. The mind fills in gaps, creating a story in which your pain is soothed, your fears are anticipated, and your unhealed wounds are, somehow, validated. This fantasy feels intensely real because it is rooted in emotional memory rather than present reality. It ignites desire, urgency, and even obsession, but it is fragile, contingent on illusion. In trauma echoes, reality is the enemy. The moment the other person contradicts your imagined narrative, through a word, action, or failure to meet your expectation, the illusion shatters, leaving chaos behind. This is why such relationships feel like a roller coaster, intense highs, devastating lows, and no clear anchor. The bond depends on keeping the fantasy alive. When you start to see the other clearly, the fear, the obsession, and the compulsion can spike because your nervous system registers the collapse as danger. The connection was never built on the actual person, but on your unmet needs, your old wounds, and your projections. A real connection is different. When fantasy meets reality, the bond does not dissolve. It endures. You see the other person for who they truly are, with strengths, flaws, contradictions, and unpredictability, and you remain oriented toward them. The nervous system, which once relied on intensity to confirm attachment, now recognizes stability and safety. Attraction becomes grounded not in anticipation, but in presence. Trust deepens because you are no longer reacting to an imagined version of the other. You are responding to the person in front of you. You no longer need the emotional fireworks to confirm significance because the connection is sustained by authenticity. The collapse of fantasy is also a test of perception. Trauma echoes often manipulate your interpretation, encouraging you to read scarcity, danger, or betrayal where none exists. You feel compelled to fill gaps with imagined threats or exaggerated significance. In a real connection, when idealized expectations are unmet, disappointment may occur, but it is processed without existential alarm. The bond does not depend on perfection or compliance. It is resilient enough to survive disillusionment because it is rooted in reality. Real love is not fragile. It tolerates the ordinary, the flawed, the human aspects that fantasy cannot sustain. Another key distinction is the role of clarity. In trauma-based connections, understanding the other person is often secondary to maintaining the intensity of the illusion. The mind and heart are busy sustaining the story rather than observing truth. In contrast, real connection thrives on clarity. Knowing the other does not diminish desire or care, it strengthens it. You are free to experience the nuances of the relationship without needing to edit reality to feel secure. When misalignments occur, conversations, adjustments, and understanding replace fear-driven reactions. You are not trapped in cyclical confusion. Your psyche recognizes patterns and navigates them consciously. A final point to consider is how this collapse interacts with personal growth. Trauma echoes encourage dependency and reinforce avoidance of internal work. You are continually drawn outward, seeking validation, reassurance, or resolution from the other person. Real connection, however, encourages self-reflection, accountability, and mutual respect. When fantasies fade, the bond deepens because it is no longer contingent on projection. You see the person clearly and can still choose connection. The relationship becomes a space for authentic engagement, not a stage for unconscious repetition. In essence, the resilience of a bond when fantasy fades is a mirror for truth. It signals that attraction, intimacy, and care are not predicated on illusions, but on a grounded, conscious recognition of each other. The connection persists not because it inflates your desires or mirrors your wounds, but because it meets reality with integrity, presence, and acceptance. One of the most defining signs of a real connection is the way conflict is experienced and processed. In trauma-based relationships, disagreement is rarely just disagreement. Every minor tension or differing opinion can trigger an unconscious cascade of fear, hypervigilance, and defensiveness. The nervous system, trained by past wounds, interprets conflict as a threat of abandonment. You may notice the immediate surge of adrenaline, the tightening of the chest, or the sudden urge to appease, explain, or withdraw. Words and actions are no longer simply communication. They become tests of loyalty, love, and survival. In such dynamics, conflict is less about resolution and more about validation of the bond's fragility. Every argument feels like it could undo the entire relationship because the connection has been built on unstable emotional scaffolding. In contrast, real connection does not equate disagreement with danger. When a conflict arises, the baseline assumption is not that the relationship is in jeopardy. Both parties recognize that differences are natural, inevitable, and even healthy. There is no compulsion to perform, appease, or manipulate outcomes to avoid the collapse of attachment. Instead, conflict is understood as an opportunity to negotiate needs, clarify boundaries, and deepen understanding. The nervous system, rather than spiking into alarm, remains relatively regulated. Tension exists, of course, but it is experienced without the accompanying terror of emotional annihilation. In this way, real connection fosters safety even in moments of disharmony. The distinction lies in the presence of secure attachment patterns. Trauma-based connections thrive on uncertainty, which keeps the psyche engaged and addicted to the intensity of fear and relief cycles. The unpredictability of the other person's responses fuels hyper-vigilance, making every conflict feel existential. Real connection, on the other hand, is built on trust, not illusion. Implicitly, that disagreements will not erase care, affection, or loyalty. There is a mutual understanding that conflict is temporary, context-dependent, and resolvable. This allows for honest expression of thoughts and feelings without the subconscious fear that vulnerability will provoke abandonment. Another aspect is emotional regulation. In trauma-driven bonds, emotions are amplified by history, projection, and survival instincts. Even small conflicts can feel catastrophic because the nervous system has been conditioned to expect rejection or punishment. In real connection, emotions are processed in real time rather than filtered through past trauma. Discomfort is acknowledged, communicated, and addressed without escalating into cycles of blame or withdrawal. The bond does not require constant repair through apology, justification, or overcompensation. The presence of conflict becomes an exercise in resilience rather than a trigger for panic. Moreover, real connection allows for integration of differences without forcing conformity. Each person retains autonomy and the ability to hold their own perspective while still remaining engaged with the other. There is no coercion to adopt another's viewpoint, nor is there fear that disagreement will fracture intimacy. Conflict is navigated with curiosity and respect, not defensiveness or performance. This is one of the most liberating aspects of authentic connection, the freedom to be fully seen, fully human, and fully fallible without threatening the stability of the bond. Finally, the way conflict is handled reflects the depth and maturity of attachment. In trauma echoes, arguments are rehearsed, replayed, and weaponized, often triggering old patterns rather than addressing present needs. In genuine connection, conflict is contextual and temporary. Disagreements clarify boundaries, strengthen communication, and enhance understanding. They do not summon fear of abandonment because the relationship is not conditional on perfection, compliance, or the suppression of authentic self-expression. In essence, when conflict does not provoke panic, when disagreements can be expressed and received without triggering existential alarm, it signals that the connection is grounded, secure, and authentic. It demonstrates that the bond is not dependent on fear, projection, or repetition of past wounds, but on mutual respect, presence, and the ability to navigate life together without sacrificing individuality. A fundamental hallmark of a real connection is that it enhances your life rather than restricting it. Trauma-based relationships, by contrast, often function like a gravitational pull toward limitation. They consume attention, energy, and emotional bandwidth in ways that subtly, or not so subtly, restrict growth. You may find that your thoughts, actions, and decisions are filtered through the lens of the relationship, shaped more by fear of loss or the need for validation than by your own desires or values. In these bonds, the connection becomes the measure of your identity. Your focus shifts from exploration, curiosity, and expansion to the maintenance of a fragile equilibrium that is rarely sustainable. True connection operates differently. It does not demand the sacrifice of autonomy or the suppression of individuality. Instead, it encourages each person to be fully themselves while engaging in shared growth. You are not asked to shrink, to censor your thoughts, or to navigate constant emotional landmines. Your curiosity, passions, creativity, and independence are recognized and supported rather than discouraged. This expansive quality allows both individuals to flourish individually while still cultivating intimacy and closeness. Real connection, in essence, functions as a fertile soil rather than a cage, nurturing growth and resilience instead of triggering restriction or regression. One of the clearest signs of an expansive bond is the freedom to explore without fear of judgment or rejection. In trauma-based connections, exploration is constrained by hyper-vigilance, as the nervous system is wired to anticipate abandonment or conflict. Choices feel loaded with consequence. What you do, say, or pursue is constantly filtered through the relationship survival dynamics. In real connection, exploration is encouraged. You can take risks, pursue passions, and express individuality, and the other person responds with curiosity, support, or at least non-judgmental acceptance. The bond is not contingent upon conformity. It is strengthened by authentic self-expression and shared respect. Expansive connections also cultivate learning and growth. They introduce perspectives, experiences, and ideas that broaden your understanding of yourself and the world. You are challenged, not coerced, to reflect, to question assumptions, and to stretch beyond comfort zones, but always in a way that preserves dignity and trust. By contrast, trauma echoes often create the illusion of connection while subtly discouraging growth. They reinforce patterns of dependency, repetition of old wounds, and emotional stagnation. The connection narrows life because it thrives on repetition, not evolution. Another way to recognize genuine connection is by observing energy flow. Trauma-based bonds tend to drain, leaving you depleted and preoccupied with maintaining the bond, predicting responses, or managing fear. In contrast, real connection energizes. Time spent together adds vitality, inspiration, and perspective. Even in moments of disagreement or challenge, the overall trajectory of the relationship is generative rather than depleting. You leave interactions feeling more present, more grounded, and more capable of engaging with life beyond the relationship. Furthermore, the real connection allows for healthy boundaries. It respects individuality while encouraging interdependence. Both people can pursue separate interests, friendships, and goals without fear of conflict or detachment. The bond thrives not by merging or controlling, but by existing as a supportive, stabilizing force in each person's life. Independence is not a threat. It is a signal of maturity and security. This dynamic creates a relationship that expands life rather than narrowing it, as both individuals are free to evolve while remaining connected. Ultimately, the expansion of life through connection reflects the fundamental difference between authentic bonds and trauma echoes. Trauma echoes demand containment, restriction, and constant emotional labor. Authentic connection fosters freedom, growth, and integration. It does not require the surrender of self. Instead, it validates, nurtures, and amplifies the person you already are, allowing both individuals to inhabit the full spectrum of their potential without fear, guilt, or coercion.